Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would chat with you guys a little bit further about clarifying some points about what concurrent periodization actually is. Now, granted, this video is not going to come out for at least a week, but a video I had put up yesterday, I discussed a little bit about what concurrent periodization is and why people use it, and I got a lot of questions, and it creates a lot of confusion. I think people really don't understand what it is. Because I had someone ask me what's the difference between concurrent periodization and DUP, which is daily undulating periodization, which is actually a form of concurrent periodization, obviously. Is heavy, medium, light the same thing as concurrent periodization? And, these were questions that let me know that people really need to understand this better. All right, guys. Normally, for most athletes, historically, linear periodization and block periodization has been the most commonly used, at least back in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, things like that, which means you would divide your training into different phases, right? So a perfect example of linear periodization might be having a 3-week block where you do 10 rep sets, and then a 3-week section where you do 5 rep sets, right? And then sometimes you'll adjust the volume for another phase of the 5 rep sets. For example, you might see people do a 5x5 for a 3-week block. Then they might drop to 3x5 for another block because, again, they're going to go heavier, significantly heavier, and they cut sets out. Then they'll go to 3 rep sets for a 3-week block. So over the course of 12 weeks, you will go from 10 rep sets all the way down to triples. All right, that would be linear periodization. In concurrent periodization, you run multiple rep ranges or training patterns in the same week with their own individual progressions. In other words, they are trained independently. So you are training for multiple goals inside the same training week. And again, they have their own progressions that are separate. In other words, each workout is not based upon the other. So in other words, if you hit a new max on your bench press, you don't adjust your volume day based upon it. It has its own set of progression. And a perfect example would be the Conjugate method, right, by the West Side Barbell with Louis Simmons. This is his brainchild. In the Conjugate method, your lifters train 4 days a week. They have 2 days dedicated to the squat and deadlift. Really the good morning also. So more or less a lower day. And then they have 2 upper days every week, which is dedicated to the bench press and the bench press accessories and other upper body movements. Now, interestingly enough, they'll still throw rows and pulling and stuff into both days. So it's not necessarily true upper lower, but it is. Now, what they will do for 2 of those days, they will be what they call max effort days, which means they build up to a max with a heavy lift, and they'll have one of those days for the squat, deadlift, good morning. They'll build one of those to a max, and then they'll do low reps for back off work, accessory work, things like that. Usually stuff in the 3 rep range, some stuff as high as 5, right? And then they'll have a separate day where they'll hit a max bench variation, some sort of pressing variation, whether it's off of boards or floor press or a normal bench or chain bench. And then they'll have low rep, heavy, various assistance and accessory movements and back off work. Then they have a separate 2 days where they'll do usually dynamic effort, or they'll even do what they call their repetition method, which is more traditional higher volume training. Again, back for the same lifts again. Squat, deadlifts, good mornings, right? And then they'll have a bench day, which is going to be dynamic effort, or they'll run their repetition method. Well, for the dynamic effort, it's all about speed triples and doubles for high numbers of sets. And then they have volume accessory work. So they might do 10 sets of box squats against bands or chains. And they'll load those into 3-week waves. So if they're going to do dynamic effort, and sometimes they'll rotate in their repetition method for periods of time, and some people who choose to do raw will actually do mostly repetition method or back and forth. And they run on separate progressions. So in other words, you're trying to hit a 1 rep max on some bench, squat, deadlift variation or good morning variation on the max effort days that's completely independent. And then they'll run traditional 3-week waves to deal with the law of accommodation on the dynamic effort days. They have their own separate programming for each set of reps. That's an example of concurrent periodization run into a 4-week section. I was doing concurrent periodization before Bulgarian training last time on something similar, right? I had my upper and lower days. And what I would do, I would come in and I had a day dedicated to hitting a max triple on the squat and then a heavy deadlift for a triple, right? I would have a heavy bench day, which is bench and overhead press. And then obviously rows and stuff. And then I would do volume triples for these lifts on a separate day. So I had a day where I would come in and just do squats, up to 10 sets of triples on squats, and then I'd do some power cleans or whatever behind it. And then I had a day where I would come in and do a bunch of triples on the bench. In that case, I was doing the floor press and the overhead press. All in one day there, right? So I would break it up into 4 days. So I had volume triples and then heavy triples, set between 4 workouts with 2 days dedicated to heavy and 2 days dedicated to volume. That's concurrent periodization. And they had their own progression patterns. Now, could heavy, medium, light be a form of concurrent periodization? Yeah, if you train for different things. But a lot of heavy, medium, light systems, you're still doing the same thing. There are heavy, medium, light systems that are just 5s based. And they're based upon the percentages of the different ones. Like you have one day that's just almost an active recovery day because you might be reducing your weights 20% for the same volume. So an example for heavy, light, medium sometimes is a 3x5. Like the squats might be Monday 3x5 with pretty heavy progression, but then you'll come in and do 5x5 with 10% less weight than that for Wednesday, and then you'll hit a 5 rep max on Friday. So a lot of times for heavy, medium, lights, your other days are based upon percentages of your 5 rep max, for example, or your 3 rep max or your 1 rep max. That's not necessarily concurrent periodization because the rep ranges are kept the same. You just have some days that are heavier and lighter. If the rep ranges are kept purely the same and they're based on percentages, and it's not necessarily training dramatically different training modalities, it might not really be concurrent periodization. So it depends on the way you set it up. Now, if you have a heavy, medium, light to where you have a moderate rep day, you have a really light volume day, and then you have a maximum weight day, that absolutely could be concurrent periodization. Just different form. It's not as extreme as like the conjugate method. The same thing, we talk about DUP. All daily undulating periodization is a form of concurrent periodization. It's a more complex form, and I'm not a big fan of DUP. I don't think we need to be mixing 3 different rep ranges in the same week. And the reason I say that, there's no evidence to suggest that DUP is superior to modalities where you train 2 different training things in the same week. Right? I don't see any evidence to suggest that, but some people enjoy DUP. And for people who enjoy daily undulating periodization, you understand you may not be getting any advantage over it if you just train 2 rep ranges in the same week. But a lot of people who have exercise or training ADHD, they tend to enjoy daily undulating periodization sometimes. It's just that, in my opinion, it's more complex, requires more careful programming with no real benefits. So I don't really promote it, but it's not bad because it's still concurrent training. And I think concurrent training works really well for intermediate and particularly for advanced lifters. I tend to promote it for that. I don't think novices need concurrent periodization. I think it can hold them back. But again, it's where you're training multiple modalities. Alex Viada, with his hybrid athletes, does concurrent periodization because it's already set up to allow you to train different things in the same week. So he actually does something really similar with a lot of his athletes, his templates he's put up over the years. For his people who do powerlifting and marathon running, for example, like he does. Like they'll have multiple days dedicated to their serious endurance work. They'll have 2 heavy days, 2 dynamic effort days for their lifting, and then they'll have 2 very serious conditioning days, but then there'll be other cardio and things sprinkled through to where they train it all in different waves, and they have them all spaced out so that you're not training the same sort of system more than once every 3 days to any meaningful degree. And that's also really common for people who run a lot of concurrent training as strength athletes and even strongmen and other things like that, is to have a lot of their general physical preparedness be stacked in on 2 of those off days every week, right? To get their work capacity up, to get their conditioning up. And so that falls really well within concurrent periodization. So if you had, let's say, 2 heavy days, you have 2 days that are dedicated to dynamic effort or volume training, or it's like a repetition method, and then you have 2 days dedicated to general physical preparedness. That's now a 6-day-a-week concurrent periodization program where you're training a large number of different training modalities. That is a perfect example of a fairly extreme version of concurrent periodization that has a track record of success. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.